Okay, good morning, Boker Tov, everyone. So, Masechet Makkot, third Perek, Daf Tet Zayin Amud Bet, at the bottom of the Amud, near the end of the Daf. We started talking yesterday, just again, a quick recap regarding Trumot and Maasrot. This is what we are dealing with. So again, we have the Truma Gdola. Now, the different Trumot and Maasrot have different statuses, have got different halachic obligations and requirements. So you have Truma Gdola, which is the first thing which is separated, that goes to the Kohen. That has to be eaten in a state of Tahara. And also a Zar, somebody who's a non-Kohen, would be forbidden from eating that. Then you have Maaser Rishon. Maaser Rishon goes to the Levi. Now also Maaser Rishon contains Trumat Maaser, which has to be separated and given to the Kohen. That is Truma, l'kol davar v'inyan. And then you have the Maaser Rishon as well. And then you have either Maaser Sheni, right, which is in year 1, 2, 4, and 5, which has to be eaten in Yerushalayim, in Tahara, or you have in year 3 and 6, Maaser Ani, which is given to the poor, Another concept, which is going to come up now, we didn't mention yesterday, but it's going to come up on today's daf, is the concept of Dmai. Right, we have an entire Masechet, the Mishnah of Masechet Dmai. The word Dmai comes from da-mai, meaning what is it? And this is that you had amei aretz, you had certain people who were not scrupulous about separating Trumot and Maasrot, and therefore Chachamim made a takana. They said, if you buy fruit or you have food from an amei aretz, and we are not sure whether they have separated Trumot and Maasrot from it, right? There's no Teudat Hechsher, we don't know, and therefore one would have to separate certain Trumot and Maasrot from that out of Safek. Okay, it's not going to be exactly the same as something which is Vadai Tevel, but it is essentially going to be Safek Tevel. That's Demai that might be Tevel, and that is going to have certain implications as well, which we will see. So if we pick it up from, let's go back from the 2 dots. So something like 10 lines from the bottom, right? We said, Chal Tevel or Maaser Rishon, etc. That was in the Mishnah. That said, if a person made tevel, Maaser Rishon shelo nitla trumato, Maaser Rishon that had not had the trumat maaser taken from it is essentially tevel as well. And then we asked the question. We said, Amar Rav, achal. Those are things for which one will get Makkot. So Amar Rav, achal tevel shel maaser ani loke. Rav says, if you eat tevel, not generally speaking, tevel means you've not had truma taken from it. But what if it hasn't had maaser ani taken from it? All the other trumot and maasrot have been separated. Says Rav, no, nonetheless, look here, you would get lashes. Come on. Who does this follow? This follows Keitana Tanya. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Yachol lo yechayav el ala tevel shelo ra mimeno kol ikar. Says Rabbi Yossi, you might have thought that you'd only be chayav malkot for eating tevel from which nothing had been separated, no truma gdola or anything else. Or maybe if it was a case of huram mimeno truma gdola, velo huram mimeno maaser rishon, right? Or you had separated truma, but you're not separated Maaser Rishon, or alternatively, Maaser Rishon v'lo Maaser Sheni, Maaser Rishon but not Maaser Sheni, ve'afilu Maaser Ani, or even if it was just Maaser Ani which had not been separated. So minayin, so where do we know that in all of those cases it is still considered to be Tevel? Tamud Lamar lo tochal lechol bish'arecha v'gomer, u'lahalanu omer right, so we have 2 psukim. The first pasuk says, "Lo tuchal le'echol b'sharecha." You won't be able to eat. You won't be able to eat tevel in your within your gates. We'll come back to that word b'sharecha. That's going to be the common word between these 2 psukim. But it says you won't be able to eat it. You have to separate all the trumot and maasrot. And then the second pasuk says, "V'achlu b'sharecha v'saveu." Now that pasuk, it says you'll eat within your gates and you'll be satisfied. That pasuk says very clearly it's referring to Maaser Ani. It talks about giving to the ger, yatom ve'almana, giving to the poor, giving to those who are less fortunate. So therefore, we know that pasuk that says achlu bish'arecha is referring to Maaser Ani. So in the first pasuk, where it says lo tuchal lechol bish'arecha, essentially the way we would read it is you won't be able to eat as long as bish'arecha, as that about which we say bish'arecha needs to be separated, has not been separated. That which is bish'arecha refers to Maaser Ani, and therefore or you'll not be able to eat it so long as that has not been taken off. That is still considered to be tevel. So says the Gemara, Malahalan Maser Ani, Afkan Maser Ani. Just as over there it's referring to Maser Ani, so to here it is referring to Maser Ani in both Pesukim. Ve'amar Rachmana lo tuchal. And it said you can't eat it. So therefore that is tevel. So we started off, right? We had this. We said Rabbi Yossi. We said Kaman. Said who is of the opinion, and we said it's Rabbi Yossi's opinion in the Tanaim that this is considered tevel without Maser Ani. We haven't really seen a dissenting opinion. We haven't seen a machloket about it. It's just Rabbi Yossi says, but everybody seems to agree. So says the Gemara, if we ask Kaman, it's implying that there is a difference of opinion. So maybe there's a machloket Tanaim on this point. So says the Gemara now, 2 lines from the bottom, Amar of Yosef Katanai. He says this is actually, in fact, a machloket Tanaim. And what is the machloket? Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ein tzarich likrot et Hashem, amaser ani shel dmai. The Chachamim omrim, so over the page, we'll come back in a moment, Koret Hashem, ve'ein no tzarich lehafresh. Okay, so here we see dmai, as I mentioned before, look at between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim. So when it comes to dmai, when it comes to produce of an Amaretz, who we suspect has not separated all the Trumot and Masrot. Well, there are certain of the Trumot and Masrot that we would suspect them for not separating, and certain ones which we would not. So, for example, when it comes to Truma Gdola, right, the Amaretz is not going to be Chashud that he has not separated Truma Gdola, which has to go to the Kohen. That we assume that everybody knows about, that we assume everybody does. But it's regarding some of the other Masrot that we're worried that perhaps they have not separated. The question is, what about Maser Ani? So, right. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ein tzarich likrot et Hashem al Maser Ani shel dmai. Right. Kriyat Hashem, we're going to see as well that there are 2 stages in the process of separating Trumot and Masrot. Process number 1 is Kriyat Hashem, which means that even if the produce is still there and you haven't yet separated anything, but you have, I suppose, designate would be the word. You've designated a certain portion of this produce to be your truma, to be your maser ani, to be your maser sheni, whatever. That is kriyat Hashem. It has still not been separated yet, but the second stage is la'afrish. There's designating it, and then there is separating it as well. Okay, there's actually a machloket as to whether those are 2 separate mitzvot or those are 2 stages of the same mitzvah. But in any event, it's 2 parts. So Rabbi Eliezer says, "Ein tzarich likrot et Hashem maser ani shel dmai." He says you don't need to designate maser ani of dmai. In other words, we'll see how we learn it. But based on what we've said so far, we started off. We're trying to address the question of whether it's considered tevel when Maser Ani has not been separated. So Rabbi Eliezer says you don't need to separate, you don't need to designate Maser Ani, and Chachamim omrim Koret Hashem ve'ein tzarich la'afresh. Chachamim say no, you have to designate it. You don't have to separate it, but you do have to designate the Maser Ani from Dmai. So maybe their machloket is whether it's still considered tevel. Whether it's still considered tevel when you have not yet separated Maser Ani. According to Rabbi Eliezer, who says that you don't need to designate it at all, so he might say that no, the tevel is regarding Truma and regarding Maser Rishon and regarding even Maser Sheni, but regarding Maser Ani, it's not tevel, therefore you don't need to designate it for Dmai. Chachamim on the other hand say, Koret Hashem ve'ein tzarich la'afresh. So Chachamim will tell you here, okay, here we're dealing with Dmai, and it's a safek, and therefore to actually separate it won't be required. Explain in a moment. But it does need to be designated, because if you have not designated, it still has the shame of tevel on the verb because of the maser ani. So the Gemara continues. We'll go back to Rashi soon, but let's just read the next line on the Gemara, top of Yud Zayin. All right, it says, "My love v'aka miflage." Surely, what are Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim arguing about? My love v'aka miflage. The ma'asava v'dai tovlo. Right here, we're dealing with a case of safek of maser ani, but the implication is that if you have vadai where you've not separated maser ani, mar savar Vadai Tovlo, that yes, it's still called Tevel, that would be Chachamim, like Rabbi Yossi. And Marsavar, Rabbi Lezer would hold Vadai Eino Tovlo, that if you had, even if Vadai, you still had the Maser Ani, but it would not be considered Tevel. Okay, so let's just go back to Tetzayin Amud Bet. Let's see Rashi. Rashi says, "Ein tzarech lakrot et Hashem." Right? Rabbi Eliezer said, "One is not required here to designate this Maserani." It says, "Damrin," and the Gemara Sotah tells us a story. The Yochanan Kohen Gadol shalach b'chol gvul Yisrael v'ra'a et ha'me'al etz chashudin al ha'maslot. Says Yochanan Kohen Gadol, he went and investigated, he searched, and he saw that the Amei Haaretz we had to suspect them, meaning they were not scrupulous about separating Masrot, chutz mit Truma Gdola, with the exception of Truma Gdola. Truma Gdola is more severe, that they would give to the Kohen, but nothing else. So Amala in Israel, and then he said to them, he said, Banai, Shem Truma b'mita kacha tevel b'mita. You are very careful about Truma, because it's chayav mita. One who eats Truma is not allowed to. Well, so too tevel would also be chayav mita, and it's still called tevel once you've separated Truma Gdola. So amad v'tiken, and therefore they made an enactment, they made a decree. Halokeach me'am haaretz yaflish kol ha'maslot u'makvan latzmo. Okay, so the decree is that somebody, right, beyond Truma, we'll see exactly how this works. But you take fruit, you take produce from an Am Haaretz, you separate all the Truma, all the Masrot. You don't have to give them away. You can keep them for yourself, but you have to separate them so that it's not Tevel. Again, this is because it's a fake. Okay, so Maser Rishon, although it's meant to be given to the Levi, nonetheless, it is mutar for a zar to eat it. Okay. Umaser sheni ochlo b'Yerushalayim. Maser sheni, he would have to take and eat in Yerushalayim. By the way, this is what we do nowadays when we separate trumot and masrot. So the truma is disposed of. The maser rishon that is kept, that can be eaten. It's designated, but that can be eaten by anybody. The maser sheni, so we use the process of pidyon, whereby we redeem it on money, so that we could, because we obviously cannot eat it in Tahara within the walls of Yerushalayim. And then he says,
Rabbi Kenigsberg, are you suggesting then that if one buys stuff in the market, where obviously the guy selling it to you is not the Talmud Chacham, that you assume, yes, that the truma has been given, but none of the others have, and that you have to do it from the produce, even though it might have that he is selling badatz or whatever the case may be?
No, so it's a good question. So nowadays we have something they didn't have back then, which is the Teudat Hechsher. This is a relatively modern innovation, but essentially, if you buy in a shop that has a kashrut certification, right, that is included within that is that all the trumot and masrot that's necessary have been separated. So as long as, and generally speaking, big supermarkets and things like that all have got their Teudat Hechsher from where they buy things from. It's all very mesudar in that sense. But so if you buy fruits, vegetables, whatever it is, if the place has a reliable hechsher, you don't have to worry. We assume that everything has been done. That's part of the hechsher.
Yeah,
Where it can be a problem,
I'm talking about buying in the market.
Sorry? We've lost you, Henry. Henry.
I'm talking about buying, say, in Machane Yehuda.
Right. So in Machane Yehuda, most of the stalls have got, you'll see they're hanging up. They've got the Teudat Hechsher hanging up there as well. So that's something one should check. Obviously, if you buy in a place that does not have certification, then one would have to worry, do it for themselves. Another case where this comes up is, believe it or not, but in Chutz La'aretz, right? So if you go, we were in London for the last 4 years, as you know. You walk into Tesco, you walk into the big supermarket, and you buy there, as is well known, over there, fruits and vegetables do not grow in trees. They grow in packets and in boxes. But you get the packet, and it tells you where it comes from. And often you get avocados or potatoes or whatever it may be, comes from its produce of Israel. Truth is, there is a machloket the Machloket HaPoskim as to whether Trumot and Masrot needs to be taken from produce of Eretz Yisrael that has been exported or that is made for export. According to many poskim, it would still require Trumot and Masrot to be separated. So there, we don't know that it has been, and over there one would have to separate themselves. Again, it's not a complicated process, but there we go. So over here, we said that when it came to this takana of Demai in those days, again there was no proof, there was no certification, and therefore those things were separated. Right, so we're now on the third last line in Rashi at the end. V'im shnat maser anihi. Okay, so we said they would have to separate from the Demai. They'd have to separate maser rishon and maser sheni. What about maser ani? So nichleku Rabbi Eliezer v'chachamim. That was a machloket. V'kamar Rabbi Eliezer lo mibai lafru shem misafek. Rabbi Eliezer says you don't need to separate it here out of safek. De lo tzarich ela afilu meaning. Definitely, you don't need to actually separate it out of Safek, and then Chachamim will agree. But even to designate it, right? The way you designate, you would say the Maser Ani or whatever Maser of this bundle will be on the north or on the top, on the bottom, right? Nami lo tzarech. That even that you don't need to do. And Chachamim say no, you do need to designate it over the page, top of Yud Zayin. Amud Aleph Korei ve'en tzarech la'afresh, says Rashi. Tekevan shekara alav shem. Once you've designated, once you've assigned that portion to be your Maser Ani, then it is no longer Teva. Right? The other Masrot, you would have to even from the you would have to separate. It's not enough just to designate the name. Why? Because the Maser Rishon you have to know, because you have to separate from the Maser Rishon the Trumat Maser. That is Truma. That has to go to the Kohen, and there's a Zar who would eat Truma. Is Chayav Mita. Okay. Umaser Sheni tzarich la'alot ol Yerushalayim v'lo ochlo. And the Maser Sheni you need to take up to Yerushalayim. So that explains why, although theoretically it would have been enough just to designate that it won't have the name of Tevel, but practically, there are reasons why Maser Rishon and Maser Sheni needs to be separated. But this is according to Chachamim, Maser Ani just needs to be designated, right? So says the Gemara on the second line, Ma'ila v'akamiflege, Demar savai v'dai tovlo, Umar savai v'dai eino tovlo. So Amar le Abaye, says now Abaye, Ihachi, adamiflege b'sfeiko, liflegu b'v'dai. Abaye says, if that's the case, then this doesn't make sense. Why are Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim arguing in such a roundabout manner? Meaning, if your machloket really is whether it's still called Tevel before you separate Maser Ani, so then just say, when you separate Maser Rishon and Maser Sheni, it's one says it's called Tevel, one says it's not called Tevel, because you need to separate Maser Ani in the appropriate year. Why are you saying, if it's a case of Demai and you've separated now out of Safek, do you need to designate or not? It's a very, very roundabout way of saying that in the case of Safek, this is what you need to do in order to learn about the case of Vadai. Just tell me that, like Rabbi Yossi said, just tell me that when you have not separated Maser Ani, then it's Tevel, or it is Tevel or it isn't. So says Abaye, Ela Tovlo. Says Abaye, no. Therefore, this is not what they're arguing about. Everybody agrees with Rabbi Yossi. Everybody agrees that if you have Tevel, that you need to separate Maser Ani. It's still called Tevel until you've separated. What's their machloket regarding Demai? Right? This is what they're arguing. Mar Savar lo nechshadu ha'me'aretz ha'maser ani shel Demai. Kevan de mamonahu aflush maflish, Labanan savli kevan de trich alemilta lo maflish. Right? Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim are not arguing about whether it's considered Tevel if you haven't separated Maser Ani. Everybody agrees you need to separate Maser Ani in order that it should not be Tevel. What they're arguing about is when you have the case of Demai, we said just as we don't suspect the Amaretz of not separating Truma Gdolah, Okay. We do suspect him from separating Maser Rishon and Maser Sheni. Do we suspect him also of separating Maser Ani? Maser Ani is going to be different. So that's the machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim. Rabbi Eliezer says you don't need to separate it, you don't need to designate it, because I assume that the Zamaharetz has already separated it. And Chachamim say no. We assume that he hasn't. What's the svara to say yes, and what's the svara to say no? So again, just reading in the Gemara, Mar Savar. Lo nechshadu ha'aretz ha'maser ani. Mar, meaning Rabbi Eliezer, says that they are not suspected of not separating the maser ani. Shadmai kevan de mamonahu aflu she maflish. Since this is just a monetary obligation, meaning that there's no chiyuv hilchati that is associated with it. But it would, in a sense, be stealing from the ani. The ani has the right to this food, and we don't suspect the Amei Aretz. Suspect they're unscrupulous in certain mitzvot, but we don't suspect them to be unscrupulous in this type of monetary matter. And therefore, we say that they separated it. Afrush mafresh. Says Rashi, Afrush mafresh le leafkue tivle. In order that what's left, meaning. Or it could be that it's mamona, meaning that it's his money that he wants to be able to eat his food. So he says lafkue tivle, to take away the name of tevel from it. Nehi de maser rishon lo maflish, even though he hasn't separated maser rishon. Why? The savar I maflishna le ba'ina laflushe trumat maser mine shu b'mita, because they'll say, here's the logic. If I separate Maser Rishon, well, then I have to separate Trumat Maser, because I can't eat the Trumat Maser because that's Chayav Mita. The same reason why he separates the Truma Gdola. So, and after and if I separate Maser Sheni, then I have to go and eat it in Yerushalayim. So therefore he says, no, I'm not going to separate those. Right? It's ironic, and obviously the logic here is faulty, because the fact that you haven't separated the Maser Rishon, right? It's still got the Truma there. I mean, it's still got the name of Tevel. But essentially the logic was, if I'll separate Truma so that it's not Tevel, but I won't call it Maser Rishon so that I won't have to give away the Truma. I won't call it Maser Sheni. So differently to say, right, I can give that to the ani and there's no problem. That is the side to say that they would separate Maser Ani. That's Rabbi Eliezer. It continues the Gemara of Rabbanan Savri. Rabbanan say what? Kevan de trich ele milta lo mafresh. Rabbanan say at the end of the day there's a tircha, there's a burden to go and to separate and to do this as well, and therefore they would not. And therefore that is the machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim. Okay, so machloket is, at the end of the day, tevel, maser ani is part of what makes something tevel as well. Now we had another the last halacha in our Mishnah, which was all the way back on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, right, which was the beginning of the Perek. Yud Gimel Amud Aleph Perek Eidu Hein Elokim. We have this long list. We're now getting to the last one. So if you just turn back and you see the Mishnah, it said, right, really it's continuing on from the same thing we just said. We said all of these cases you would get Makkot. So then the Mishnah said, what measurement, what amount of tevel would it be that one would be chayav Makkot? And here we have a machloket. Rabbi Shimon Omer Koshu, v'Chachamim Omrim Kazait. Right, Rabbi Shimon says anything, even the smallest bite, you would be chayav, and Chachamim say no. We need a kazait. Okay, so here Agmara says, Amarav, we now have a machloket as to what the machloket between Rabbi Shimon and Chachamim was. Amar Rav Bibi, who is a Kam Yochanan Tevel, etc. Amar Rav Bibi, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Machloket bachita, aval bakemach divrei hakol kazait. Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, k'machloket bazo, kach machloket bazo. So we have a machloket between Rav Bibi and Rav Yirmiyah as to what Reish Lakish said regarding what is the machloket between Chachamim and Rabbi Shimon. According to the first opinion, we said that the Mishnah said, we saw in the Mishnah, they argued, for example, about a piece of wheat. Right? The Rabbi Shimon said, even on one piece of wheat, you would be chayav. Chachamim said, no, not until you have a kazayat. So the first opinion here says that's machloket b'chita, aval b'kemach d'vei kol kazayat. The Rabbi Shimon would agree that it's only regarding chita that he said that one chita you would be chayav, but when it comes to kemach, when it comes to flour, then you need the entire share of a kazayat. And then Rabbi Yirmiyah says, no, that's not what Reish Lakish said. That's not the argument. Really, he said, machloket bazo, kach machloket bazo. So according to that, even Rabbi Shimon would agree that for consuming the smallest amount of food, whatever it is, even if it's flour, there one would still be chayav malkot, and one does not need a kazayat. Okay, we'll stop there. Tomorrow we'll see exactly what's behind their machloket, how we understand the Mishnah and the Gemara, and we will continue. So Yishar Koach, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Tomorrow will be our last year before Pesach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good day.
All right. Good day, everybody.